Hello, everybody. Let's just give some time to everybody who's joining us, and then we will start. I think we'll start, and everyone else who's joining us will find us on the way. So welcome everyone to today's session organized by VODAN Africa. This will be the fourth installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop. My name is Charles Kahiro. I am the Creative Director at TravelWorks Africa, leading provider for consulting services in organizational management, learning, and development. So today's session is led by Eric, whom we have met many times before if you have attended the other Metadata for Machines workshops. He's the International Science Coordinator at the GOFE International Support and Coordination Office. So for today's session, we will go over the proposed high-level metadata structure for the FAIR data points that we are setting up as the country teams, as well as we will take a look at the progress so far on that installation while going over the composition and the status of the different country teams that were set up over the last workshop and over the last week. There are some changes that have been made. So during the presentation, let's just try to keep our mics muted to prevent background noises from disrupting the presentation. So if you are yet to do so, kindly do so now. And as always, we would like to hear from you. So if you have any questions while the presentation is going on, just type them into the chat box and we will bring them up as the presentation proceeds. And just to highlight, we will also have some time at the end for a question and answer session. With that, I hand over to Eric. Eric, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Charles. And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Metadata for Machine Workshop webinar. And as Charles mentioned, this is number 4 of 8 that we plan on having. Because I think we can actually accomplish what we set out to do in the remaining 4 metadata for machine workshops that we have. But there was a realization last week that things were moving maybe too quick, that there was a lot of information coming at you that might be very new. So what we have done starting last week, and I will continue this week, is to try and slow things down a little bit to see if we can get focused on a couple of key issues that need to happen. And hopefully that focus will give everybody a little bit more breathing room and help us to make another click on the FAIR data point installment so that we can then kind of move on to the remaining things that we need to do in setting up this VODAN COVID-related FAIR data system. So with that in mind, with this idea of trying to keep things a little bit simpler today, this is an agenda that we'd like to do. It may be that this won't even take the entire hour, so I hope even that there's breathing room at the end for us to have more of an exchange. So 3 things today. I want to go through a status update on the formation of country teams that we have, and there we would have a goal to have complete teams working by next week. So we'll review that. I want to go through the status of the FAIR data point installation itself. We have this call home feature on the FAIR data points, and we'd like to get that operational by next week as well. And then I just wanted to review the kind of topic that we talked about last week, which is this very high level FAIR data point metadata description. So, who are these FAIR data points and how do we describe them at the highest level? And how can they be related to each other between the 6 different countries that are participating here? So for the first topic, this idea of the country teams, we mentioned this last week, and I just wanted to follow through again this week and make sure we get to a complete listing. So I think on the call right now, I see 27 participants. So what I would hope is that by next week, all 27 people on this call, I guess minus the organizers here, have put their name somewhere on this sign-up sheet for the country teams. And to get to this sign-up sheet, you can go to this familiar URL that we've had for a while now. It's the M4M scoping exercise. And that will take you to a Google spreadsheet. And if you go to the FDP Deployment Teams tab, then you'll see the 6 country teams there. And we have now assigned country leads, and we have now assigned technical leads for each team. And for the rest of you, please, if you can, over the next day or so, just add your name to the appropriate country team. Not necessarily the country you live in, but whatever country you'll be working with in support of setting up that FAIR data point. This will be important because I think the country lead and the technical support here, these people will very much help to get these FAIR data points up and running at a technical level. But then the other stakeholder representatives here, meaning the rest of you, will be very important in helping us to get content into the FAIR data point and get that data exposed in a fair way. So the goal then is for every person to be assigned to a team by next week. And then, like I say, this way we can cover both the technical and content issues. So take a look at that and find out where you best belong. The second topic is really this, oh yeah, well, I should maybe mention just a few more things about the country teams. Maybe just to look at it graphically here. So this is also a familiar picture that we've been using to describe the architecture of the FAIR data point and the local data from clinical settings that will go into that FAIR data point. So, in this case, the data sets at the bottom in blue are these electronic case report forms. And the FAIR data point up on top is metadata that points to and announces the existence of these case report forms. And so, of course, we have to work at the local hospitals to make sure the data can get into these case report forms. But the designation of these technical leads who are listed here, and I'm going to make a correction here, pardon me. Yeah. So the technical leads will handle the installment of the FAIR data point itself and in figuring out how to make the connections to the data wherever they may be held. But then we also have the content leads, or the stakeholder representatives, who, as far as I will understand at the moment, will be the people who are working in the clinical environment, helping to get some of the medical data, the patient record data, into the electronic case report form. So that's the idea behind these technical leads and the rest of us. But it's important that for each country, we know who the people are in these two categories. Okay. So then now it leads us to the second point, which is the FAIR data point installation itself. And again, this is something we started last week. We had a poll last week to ask among the participants, who has either an operational FAIR data point at the moment, or one that's in progress, or one that's maybe still in the planning stages. And these were, if I have the data correct, this is kind of the breakdown that we had from last week. However, we have yet to receive on our end what we call the call home registration from the FAIR data point. So upon successful installation of the FAIR data point and a working internet connection, the FAIR data point should automatically register itself with a registry that we have running here in the Netherlands in the development team. And as of this point, we haven't seen the potentially operational FAIR data points in Ethiopia or Uganda appear on our call homepage. So you can take a look at this yourself. If you go to home.fairdatapoint.org, you can see this registration page. It's pretty simple, pretty minimal at the moment. Don't be distracted by a couple links here that are only there as kind of test URLs. They're there just for testing purposes. But the other links here are in fact FAIR data points that are running. Essentially the same version FAIR data point that you were running yourselves. So these, what we'd expect to see then when we have a successful FAIR data point installation in Africa is additional URLs here. And this is nice because once we can see that FAIR data point, it allows us then to go back and index that FAIR data point and begin building up some kind of search capability on the data and the metadata at that FAIR data point. So what we would like to do for next week is to get the FAIR data points for each country up and running to the point where we get the call home message. And what we will, and this has now been some arrangements made offline in between last week and now, but we have arranged a troubleshooting webinar for May 26th. But I think it's enough to have only the country leads and the technical leads present on that call, so we don't have to distract the majority of the rest of you with the technical details of setting up the FAIR data point. I anticipate we're just going to ask some basic questions, maybe about Docker image installation, and probably some preferences and settings that can just make this go easier. So from a content perspective, probably not relevant for most of you, but at least for the country leads and the technical leads, it'll be great to have them on this webinar next week. We'll find a time to schedule this because it's also the same day as this webinar. So we'll try to figure out an appropriate time frame for that. The other thing that will come out of this webinar and this experience will be recording some of the call them like frequently asked questions or some of the troubleshooting blocks that might be frequently encountered here. This can also begin building up the let's say the documentation or even maybe the training manual for helping people to set up the FAIR data points more and more independently on their own without the needed assistance from the technical team here in the Netherlands. So that's a goal for next week. Let's get a call home signal from your country's fair data point. And then the last thing I just wanted to cover today was a reminder, again, of something we talked about last week. And this is the idea that we'll have fair data points up and running, perhaps 2 in Ethiopia. And we want to begin to figure out, well, how do we talk about these fair data points? What's their name? Who do they belong to? Who takes responsibility for them? And these kind of issues, because these are really going to be the metadata issues that we would want to have answers for in a metadata for machine workshop. And as a reminder, the metadata structure of the fair data point is hierarchical. And I'm showing in red here the 3 layers of the fair data point. So there's the fair data point itself at the highest level, there's the catalog in the middle, and there's a data set within the catalog. So within a fair data point, there could be 1 or many catalogs. Within a catalog, there could be 1 or many data sets. And within the fair data point, we have the capability of assigning the publisher of the fair data point. And you can think of that as the owner or the author, the organization that takes control of this fair data point. And my suggestion, my proposition to the group would be that we choose a publisher in each of these levels in a consistent way so that these fair data points become analogs of each other, although they may be specialized for each particular region that they're in. So what I can imagine is that as a group, we would decide to have the publisher of the fair data point be some kind of national entity, maybe Ministry of Health, but somehow a designation of the country in which these fair data points are operating. That way we can talk about the fair data point of Uganda or the fair data point of Zimbabwe at the country level. At the catalog level, I'm going to propose that we have a publisher that would be the hospital itself, because the catalog will allow us then to name potentially a number of different hospitals in each country. So you could have Uganda Hospital number 1, Uganda Hospital number 2, etc., each forming its own catalog, its own data catalog. And that means that within that catalog, there would be a data set, these electronic case report forms in particular, that would also be published by or belong to the hospital. So these case report forms would have been created within the context of a hospital or clinical setting. There may be other data sets to come beyond the case report forms, and that's okay. Those would just be additional data sets in the same hospital catalog. If there is altogether another, more than one hospital operating or participating in this project, then in that country, we can make another catalog for the other additional hospitals. So I hope that's making sense, and it's really going to be the final decision of the VODAN Africa project, how to structure the metadata designations like this. This is my proposition to you, but let's see where it goes. Maybe there's a better idea. But there's another element to this which I haven't mentioned yet, which is conforms to. It's under the fair data point. This is another record in the metadata of the fair data point that is specifying how this fair data point is structured in terms of the standards that are being followed within it. And this is something that will likely, we can help manage this because I think we have some experience in doing this. But what we would like to do is call this a VODAN fair data point as well. So this fair data point will conform to a VODAN specification. And within that VODAN specification, this project and the VODAN in GoFair can help to specify the standards that we're following in order to talk about COVID-19 data. So this is really just a way of specifying the standards that are being used here, so that when a computer visits this FAIR data point, it will be able to understand immediately what it's looking at and kind of the rules and regulations by which this FAIR data point is operating. One example of this would be, in the case report forms, we're following the WHO standard, the World Health Organization standard. So when it says conforms to VODAN, the VODAN specification will say, yes, the WHO case report form standards. And again, I mentioned this last week, but I'm including it here just for reference. If you go to the metadata specification of the FAIR data point, and you look at the FAIR data point level, the catalog level, or the dataset level, you'll see where it refers to publisher and conforms to. And so that's just a way to begin for us to start structuring our FAIR data points in some coherent way that it'll be much easier to query these later on. And by the way, I can tell you that there's a lot of development now in the Netherlands to also set up, I think, a very large number of FAIR data points in Dutch hospitals. And because the VODAN Africa group has a head start here, I think some of the decisions you're making will actually impact how the FAIR data points look when they get deployed also in the Netherlands. So what would be very nice is within some time frame of, I don't know, maybe 6 months or a year, just to be on the safe side. I think it can happen much faster. But we could imagine then a network of VODAN FAIR data points operating in Africa, as well as at least the Netherlands. So that's a pretty exciting prospect. And then lastly, just a couple more slides to remind us of the bigger picture in the time frame. I've shown this slide also a few times now. We're at Metadata for Machine Workshop number 4 here, May 19th. And what we're going to try and do is follow through with setting up the teams with the technical leads. And we'll do this webinar next week to see if we can get a FAIR data point deployed and calling home in each country. If not by May 26th, then at least maybe by the end of next week. I think that would be a very nice goal to achieve. And then again, kind of stepping back to take the broader picture, this is part of a timeline I showed early on. And this is saying that in April, May, and June, we're going to try and get some actual data operating on a FAIR data point in each of the 6 countries. And what we're showing in April is that we were able to use the WHO standard to make this electronic case report form in RDF. And that's available now in the FAIR data point. We started the metadata for machine workshops at the end of April, and this will take us through mid-June or so. And we're about halfway through the process now. And I think we're close to setting up our FAIR data point. And then let's say by the end of June, we're actually in the hospitals, making sure that patient data is expressed in that case report form. And if all that can be accomplished, and through that experience, we begin working up some training and documentation on this, then it's possible in July, August, September to start thinking about a larger scale deployment and maybe a more independent deployment where we can really have a kind of VODAN FAIR data point in a box that can be downloaded and deployed using the documentation materials generated in this project. And so lastly, yeah, Charles.
We have some questions in the chat box. So I figured before we go ahead, and we have too many to cover. I see we only have one slide left.
Yeah, I think we're done, so it's a good time.
Yeah, great. So we have some questions. One is around the publishing. So someone is asking, is it possible to make the publisher the Regional Health Bureau instead of the National Ministry of Health?
Absolutely.
So if we go back to the
Yep.
high-level metadata.
Absolutely. So let me go back to here. And the answer is absolutely. The high-level designation of these fair data points, whether they are at the country level or they are at an alternative regional level, I think is fully under the control of the people who want to set it up there. I say country here because it's sort of conceptually maybe the easiest way to think about it in terms of, oh, we have 6 countries, we want a fair data point in each one. But if it is, if it's more meaningful at the level of like jurisdictional matters, or at the level of the actual, tracking of the disease outbreak, if it makes more sense to do it at a regional health bureau level, then I think that's a great idea as well.
All right. There's another question regarding the FDP installations. I think Ethiopia managed to get an installation. Sorry, Francisca, is that you?
I wanted to add to what Eric already said.
All right.
The governance and the specification would have to be determined by the country, just like Eric said. So it's up to the country cohort to decide on who the publishers will be. If it's going to be the central as a country, or it's going to be like broken down into the different bureaus. That's just the point I wanted to add to what Eric said, just to reinforce what he already said. So the
that's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
Remember, the data points are for the country team. So as a country project, you will have to decide how you want to define your publishing. Whatever Eric is giving you is just guidelines or ideas on how you can structure your format, but ideally you're the ones to choose how you want to do it.
Yes, subject to the regulations of each country. Actually, each country they already have the regulations on how they classify their healthcare data. So they have to put that in consideration as well.
Yep, absolutely. And, to the degree that there needs to be, a kind of discussion here, like we are doing with the technical teams, we may find that there's a subset of people on this call that might have particular expertise or interest in this particular question. And if and when it becomes useful, then we can always, I think, productively break into smaller groups and then get answers to these questions. So that's for later, but absolutely these issues of defining the names or the publishers of these fair data points is going to be the next order of business once we get the fair data points up and running.
Yeah, and I think that's a good problem to have once everything is running, because I think we'd be preempting or trying to bite the bullet before it's even been shot, essentially.
Indeed.
So we have a question also on the FDP installation. I know with local deployments, there are some errors that normally pop up, and we have some, I think it's Ethiopia, that's asking whether the deployment has to go further from being a local deployment into a production deployment. Is that what you are looking for in terms of a fulfillment of the FDP installation? Because on their end, they are getting the 404 errors. I know others are getting, they're unable to get data errors, which I believe will be covered next week in the webinar on troubleshooting. But
yeah, indeed. So without overstating my own expertise on the fair data point, I think this probably is the issue, that it has to be more than the local deployment. It has to go into production mode, and then we should, I think, be able to see a registration happening on the call home feature. So that might be the holdup. And I don't know what it might take for you to move into production mode, but to the degree that that happens, we can, I think, signal back to you whether or not we see well, I mean, you can see it yourself, I guess, because you have the URL at home.fairdatapoint. So it should be something that you can actually see yourself, that there's a registration happening.
Yeah, and I believe it does require a full production deployment.
Yeah.
We have additional questions, one from Miriam actually, on the Netherlands FDP installations question. So if the Netherlands deploy FDPs in each hospital, why can't we deploy FDPs in university or university hospitals in Africa? She believes that would be a little bit more practical.
Yeah, indeed. So if I go back to this picture here, and then I'll just go to the simple version of it here. This picture is designed to demonstrate that the FAIR data point can point to data located wherever it may be, and could be located in many different places. Could be a university, could be a hospital, whatever. But that FAIR data point can be a host of the metadata for those data objects. And what I'm showing here is a data repository for these electronic case report forms that are likely housed at the hospital itself. So in computers located at the hospital itself. And if that is a solution, then we can certainly handle that. If it's better or somehow more convenient for the data to be stored at, say, Kampala International University in the case of Uganda, then that's perfectly fine as well. So I'm just showing here by illustration, that the hospitals could not only, have the final authority on the control of this data, but they could even physically keep the data within their own firewalls, in their own jurisdiction, in their own hospital. But if the hospital would like to, say, contract out the data to Kampala International University, then that's perfectly fine as well. Does that answer the question?
Miriam, do you feel your question has been answered, or?
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's good that we are having this discussion, but I think, in the Slack, we made the country groups so that this can be discussed. And I think in most of the country groups, there is some clarity what the best arrangement is. And they are really different from each country to each country, because the situation is different. There are different sort of actors involved. So I'd suggest that maybe, Eric, you see if you can touch base. There are only 6. Just discuss it with each of the group. And I think it can be different to each of the country. I mean, just like we're talking about the Netherlands, is only a country of 17 million people. With Africa, we're talking about 1.5 billion. So we shouldn't assume that we could just have one country FDP. So in the case of Ethiopia, I think there will be one in Addis, and there will be one in Mekelle, and then they can point to each other, and that way you have different levels, and I think it will be better to organize it in that way, according to the jurisdictions that everybody can carry. Otherwise, we are doing overreach, I think.
No, absolutely. And in the diagram here is meant only to indicate that, yeah, there is in fact this freedom to operate. The data can be stored and accessed in a completely distributed way. So it's really then up to the local authorities to figure out how to build that architecture to serve their purposes. And that, in my view, is actually the real job of the Metadata for Machine workshop. It's why we formulated this platform, this format, because we knew that in every case, the peculiar situation to that, to that stakeholder will require, probably a customized reworking of the fair data point architecture and the metadata behind it. So indeed, what would be nice is to try and get for each country maybe like a one-pager, and maybe this would be edited by the country leads of each team, where in that one-pager it would describe the key stakeholders in play and the authorities they have, the jurisdictions they have, and then maybe kind of a consensus view on who the publishers are of the fair data point and the catalogs and the data set level metadata descriptions. So this is something that we can formulate as well. I can help formulate that, and maybe help guide each of the countries then in formulating this kind of this one-page description of their point of view on the metadata.
But in the questionnaires, people have already looked at where the fair data points would be placed.
Yes. So we can harvest very, very much from the questionnaires that have
yes.
that are, I think, mostly there. Yeah. If there's not
yes.
All of them, then I think we're close to having all of them.
So I think in follow-up of this session, we can have that discussion, Eric, and then, but I think it's also then important that for the way in which the groups are organized, it's not, there can be a country designation, but some groups are working within country and then you have multiple groups, and that is perfectly fine. So it shouldn't be a rigid national designation of fair data points, which is also appearing in the form on the collaboration. So maybe we need to look at that, but we can do it outside the call here now.
Yeah, I absolutely, and especially like with the tech leads, I think we've identified 3 tech leads now, but there are 6 countries, so I think we automatically imagine that the tech leads will be assisting, between countries in general, and I think people who may be subscribed to a particular country team could still very well be working laterally between countries, depending on the particular metadata issue that's at hand.
Yeah, and would be working with multiple fair data points in some cases, like in
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like
so the attempt here is really just to kind of provide, like Charles said, kind of a guidance or guidelines for what are the kind of the architectural elements here, and then it's up to all the people participating how that's actually going to be constructed, and that's exactly the role of a metadata for machine workshop. It's to provide that space and that opportunity for people to figure out how best to structure these things to serve their purposes.
But still with the concept of multiple fair data points within countries.
Absolutely. And well, it could be, Miriam, that by some time frame in the not too distant future, that countries could be running many fair data points. I would expect that to be, if this is successful in the first phase, that we might expect that in the second phase. And maybe not just for COVID-related data, but maybe for other viral outbreaks, maybe for other infectious diseases, maybe for other medical concerns. So the platform and technology is pretty generic. And if people get a feeling for how it's working and they prove to themselves that the way they structured things is making sense and is fulfilling their needs, then yeah, it could be quite routine to generate additional fair data points to serve lots of different purposes.
Right.
Thank you.
On with the questions, we have actually a very good question from Esther. She's asking, at what point will the healthcare professionals be actively involved? Because so far this looks very technical.
Yes, Charles, could you repeat, when will which professionals get involved?
When will the healthcare professionals be actively involved? Because so far it looks like it's a discussion for computer and data scientists.
Yeah, indeed. So, and I think at the moment, Esther, we are sort of trying to get through the first technical hurdle, which is to get these fair data points to call home and register themselves. And then we know, indeed, they're in this production mode and ready to go. And then it's at that point that not only I'd say the medical professionals, but then also, you know, the jurisdictional professionals, the people who take responsibility for the fair data points will be called to make their decisions about how to structure the metadata, about who owns what, who has responsibility for what, and then, like I say, there will be then very soon after a discussion about, in each clinical setting, how it is, in a very practical sense, that information from patient medical records can be harvested for the case report forms. And of course, that's, you know, data sensitive procedures there. So all of that has to be done in the context of the hospital and, you know, the rules and regulations operating there. But then that will be the role, I think, of the healthcare professionals, is to actually inspect these records and to, you know, with their expertise, populate these case report forms with the appropriate information. So step one is to get this fair data point up and to call home. And step two might be then to customize it with appropriate metadata, sort of generic metadata to describe the fair data point. And then step three is really to be in the hospital environment, working with the people there to figure out how to get this data into the case report form.
All right, I don't think we have any more questions in the chat box. Great, we have a comment from Reginald highlighting that this is great feedback on the FDP authority publisher, and if local hospitals can have the power to do so. In Kenya, we have a new constitution to guide on governance issues and Ministry of Health policies on data, which will be the starting point of reference.
Super. So I was assuming up till now that most of the fair data points might be themselves, the publisher might be the ministries of health. Not that that's necessary, but that was just kind of my presumption. So, you know, maybe that's consistent here with what Reginald is saying. But his question triggers also maybe the other extreme view of this. And this goes back to Miriam's question as well. Is it of interest that the fair data points themselves would be published by the hospital environment? So maybe the jurisdiction, it remains entirely local to the hospital versus, you know, a regional health bureau or a Ministry of Health. And again, I don't have any strong recommendation here. It's just occurring to me now that the local clinical setting could be the publisher of the fair data point, as well as these catalogs and data sets. So it's wide open how we want to structure this. And you know, looking at the map, looking that we have 6 different countries, my first thought was to structure it along country lines, but really anything's possible.
Yeah. options are endless. I think for now, the main thing is just to get some form of fair data points running, because then the rest can be put into practical experimentation. Because now it's all, you know, abstract in the air, because there is no fair data point on the ground anywhere in any of the teams. So yeah.
At least none that have succeeded in calling home yet.
And calling home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you can finish with the last two slides before we stop.
And yeah, I think we got here. It's just a reminder. You know, the two things I would like to ask from you this week then would be to assign yourself to a country team with the proviso, as Miriam said, that it could be that you will, in addition to having some kind of country designation, you may be helping to make decisions that cut across national boundaries. But we will see what that looks like, I think, as time goes on. But I think it's nice just to have an assessment of who the people are in those jurisdictions. And then the second thing is, you know, either tinkering on your own in the meantime. If you have specific questions from the technical people, I can forward these to our tech team. But in any case, a week from today, we will have the webinar for troubleshooting, and hopefully very soon after that, we could really see these fair data points up and running. If that works out, then the following week, we're really making decisions then on metadata. And I think we really have something very impressive already to show. So, and I'll leave it there until next week.
Yeah, so let's take this week at least to get the fair data points running. There is a group on Slack for tech support for everyone who is unable to get theirs up and running. The tech leads have already been highlighted. And like Eric is saying, there will be a webinar next week. So there's enough support for everyone who's encountering any difficulties with regards to the FDP installation. I don't know whether there are any last questions or comments before we close the show. Going once. Going twice. I guess that's it. So thank you, everyone. We really do appreciate that you took time to be with us here today. As always, a recorded version of the webinar will be available on the VODAN Africa website next week, or even sometime this week, actually. So if you did miss part of the webinar, or would you like to review a section of it, be sure to check it out. Also, join us next week. We will still have the 5th installment of the Metadata for Machines workshop, in addition to the troubleshooting one. Details and timings for the same will be shared on the VODAN Africa communication channels, whether it's the Slack group or the WhatsApp groups or on email. So be sure to check that one out as well. Thanks again for joining us, and I guess we will see you next time.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
You're welcome.